It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, there was nothing unusual about the gathering itself. Senior members of the royal household had attended countless private meetings over the years, many of them concerning routine family matters or official responsibilities. Yet those familiar with the atmosphere surrounding this particular discussion sensed something profoundly different. Behind closed doors, Catherine and Prince William reportedly sat with trusted medical advisors as conversations unfolded that would leave even seasoned palace staff unsettled. Details remained tightly guarded, but whispers of a sudden concern involving Princess Charlotte began circulating almost immediately among those closest to the family. What made the situation even more alarming was the extraordinary level of secrecy that followed. Palace aides, who normally work carefully to calm speculation, appeared determined to say almost nothing at all. Questions were met with silence. Requests for clarification went unanswered. Even experienced royal correspondents who had spent years navigating palace corridors found themselves encountering an unusual wall of restraint. The absence of information became a story in itself, fueling growing concern that something far more significant was happening behind the scenes. Then came the moment that intensified every rumor. Catherine emerged from the private discussions looking noticeably emotional. Those who observed her afterward described a woman carrying the weight of troubling news while doing everything possible to maintain composure. It was not simply concern that appeared to surround her. It was uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that follows a conversation capable of changing plans, expectations, and perhaps even the course of a family's future. The princess had spent years projecting strength during public challenges, yet this felt different. Something had clearly shaken the confidence that had become one of her defining qualities. Later that same day, attention quietly shifted toward William. Reports emerged that the future king spent significant time with Charlotte, offering comfort and reassurance away from public scrutiny. While no official explanation was provided, the image of a father focusing his attention on his daughter only deepened speculation that the family was confronting a deeply personal challenge. The silence surrounding the situation allowed countless theories to flourish. But one thing became increasingly clear. Concern inside the royal household was genuine. Yet as these private worries intensified, another problem was quietly gaining momentum elsewhere within the monarchy. For weeks, insiders had whispered that tensions had been building behind palace walls. Disagreements that once appeared manageable were reportedly becoming harder to contain. Relationships that had survived years of scrutiny seemed increasingly strained. What initially appeared to be a separate dispute involving Queen Camilla was now unfolding at precisely the same moment as the concerns surrounding Charlotte, causing some observers to wonder whether the two developments were connected in ways the public had not yet understood. The deeper investigators looked, the more troubling the timing appeared. Two royal crises emerging simultaneously was unusual enough. But the possibility that they might somehow intersect created an entirely new level of intrigue. Suddenly, the focus was no longer limited to Charlotte's well-being. Questions were expanding toward power, influence, and conflicts that may have been simmering beneath the surface for far longer than anyone realized. And as whispers transformed into serious concern, one unavoidable question began echoing through royal circles. Was the family facing two separate storms, or was a single explosive truth waiting to bring them together? But the chilling truth wasn't just about Charlotte's situation. It was connected to an explosive confrontation that was already shaking the foundations of the monarchy. For years, palace insiders whispered about growing differences between Catherine and Camilla. But what allegedly happened behind closed doors this time was unlike anything the royal household had faced before. The uncertainty surrounding Charlotte's situation had already placed enormous pressure on the family. Emotions were running high, nerves were stretched thin, and every decision seemed to carry greater consequences than usual. Yet while public attention remained focused on the concerns surrounding Catherine and her daughter, another story was quietly unfolding within palace walls. According to reports circulating among royal circles, a private discussion between Catherine and Camilla had escalated into something far more serious than anyone expected. What began as a conversation reportedly evolved into a confrontation that left even seasoned aides stunned by its intensity. Those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy have long suggested that the relationship between the two women was never entirely simple. While both occupied important positions within the institution, they represented different generations, different experiences, and, according to some observers, different visions for the future of the royal family. For years, those differences were managed carefully behind closed doors. Publicly, unity remained the priority. Privately, however, whispers of disagreement occasionally surfaced before quickly disappearing beneath the carefully maintained image of stability. This time was different. Reports suggest that the discussion touched upon sensitive issues involving family priorities, public responsibilities, and the growing pressures facing the monarchy during one of its most challenging periods in recent memory. With King Charles already confronting personal struggles, and Catherine reportedly dealing with concerns involving Charlotte, tensions throughout the household were said to be unusually high. Under such circumstances, even small disagreements carried the potential to become much larger conflicts. According to those close to the situation, emotions that had remained controlled for years may have finally reached a breaking point. What shocked many insiders was not merely the existence of disagreement, but the reaction it reportedly provoked among those present. Senior aides who were accustomed to navigating difficult conversations allegedly found themselves caught off guard by the atmosphere surrounding the exchange. Some accounts described a level of tension rarely witnessed within the senior ranks of the family. Others spoke of an overwhelming sense of disbelief as discussions became increasingly heated. While official details remained tightly guarded, the rumors alone were enough to send shockwaves through the institution. Within hours, speculation began spreading through royal circles with remarkable speed. Staff members whispered about an incident serious enough to demand immediate action from senior officials. Longtime observers who had spent decades studying the monarchy suddenly found themselves asking questions they had never expected to ask. What exactly had been said? Why had the situation escalated so dramatically? And perhaps most importantly, what impact would it have on a family already facing extraordinary challenges? The answers remained elusive, but one development quickly became impossible to ignore. Word of the confrontation reportedly reached King Charles almost immediately. That fact alone suggested the seriousness of the situation. Minor disagreements rarely required direct intervention from the monarch. Yet this incident appeared significant enough to demand his attention at once. Suddenly, the concerns surrounding Charlotte were no longer the only crisis unfolding behind palace walls. A separate conflict was emerging, one that threatened to deepen existing divisions and place Charles in an increasingly difficult position. As rumors multiplied and uncertainty spread, a troubling reality began to take shape. The monarchy was facing multiple pressures simultaneously, each one capable of creating lasting consequences on its own. Combined, they formed a storm that seemed to be growing stronger by the day. And at the center of that storm stood a king, already carrying the weight of immense personal and institutional responsibilities. As details of the confrontation spread through palace corridors, tension quickly turned to the one man caught directly between the two women. King Charles had spent years trying to maintain peace within his family. Now, that balance appeared to be collapsing in front of him. As whispers surrounding the confrontation between Catherine and Camilla continued spreading through royal circles, attention inevitably shifted toward the man standing at the center of it all. For decades, Charles had navigated some of the most difficult family challenges imaginable. Public controversies, private disagreements, shifting loyalties, and relentless scrutiny had become familiar parts of his life. Yet this moment appeared different. The pressures surrounding him were no longer arriving one at a time. They were converging from every direction at once, creating a crisis that threatened both his family and the institution he had spent a lifetime preparing to lead. The timing could hardly have been worse. While concerns involving Charlotte reportedly weighed heavily on Catherine and William, Charles was already carrying the burden of significant personal challenges of his own. Expectations remained enormous. Responsibilities continued without pause. Every public appearance was examined. Every decision attracted attention. Behind the formal duties and carefully maintained composure, however, there were growing signs that the strain was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Those closest to the palace began quietly acknowledging what many had suspected for months. The king was facing one of the most demanding periods of his reign. What made the situation particularly painful was the position in which Charles found himself. On one side stood Camilla, the woman who had shared years of public battles and personal sacrifices alongside him. On the other stood Catherine, a future queen whose popularity, dedication, and role within the monarchy had become more significant than ever. Reports suggested that Charles desperately wanted to avoid choosing between them. Maintaining unity had always been his preferred path. He understood better than anyone the damage internal conflicts could cause when they escaped beyond palace walls. Yet, with tensions escalating, remaining neutral was becoming increasingly difficult. Senior advisors reportedly recognized the danger almost immediately. Conversations behind closed doors grew more frequent. Meetings became longer. Concerns that had once seemed manageable suddenly felt urgent. The challenge was no longer simply resolving a disagreement. The challenge was preventing a family dispute from evolving into a broader struggle over influence and authority. According to insiders, some advisors feared that every passing day without a resolution risked deepening divisions that could become far harder to repair later. At the same time, public responsibilities continued demanding Charles's attention. Official engagements remained on the calendar. State matters required decisions. The monarchy's work moved forward regardless of the turmoil unfolding behind the scenes. Yet beneath the appearance of continuity, uncertainty continued to grow. Observers began noticing subtle signs that the institution itself was entering a period of transition. Questions that once seemed unthinkable were now being discussed more openly. Who held the greatest influence within the royal household? Which voices carried the most weight during moments of crisis? And if competing loyalties continued pulling the monarchy in different directions, who would ultimately shape its future? Those questions became increasingly difficult to ignore, because the confrontation between Catherine and Camilla appeared to represent something larger than a single disagreement. It reflected shifting dynamics inside the family itself. New generations were assuming greater responsibilities. Established relationships were being tested. Long-standing balances of power seemed less certain than before. For Charles, the challenge was no longer simply restoring harmony. It was preserving stability during a period when stability felt increasingly fragile. As pressure mounted, many expected the king to deliver an answer capable of calming the growing storm. But while Charles searched for a path forward, another reality was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. Someone else was watching events unfold. Someone whose influence had been growing steadily while the spotlight remained elsewhere. And as uncertainty continued to spread through the palace, that figure appeared ready to play a far larger role than anyone had anticipated. But while Charles searched for a solution, another powerful figure was quietly preparing to step forward. As husband, father, and future king, William suddenly found himself facing a crisis that threatened both his family and the institution he was destined to lead. While King Charles struggled to hold together competing loyalties, another center of gravity was quietly emerging within the royal family. The growing uncertainty surrounding Charlotte, the reported confrontation between Catherine and Camilla, and the mounting pressure on the monarchy had placed Prince William in a position unlike any he had faced before. For years, he had carefully balanced duty with family life, preparing for responsibilities that still seemed somewhere on the horizon. But now that horizon appeared to be moving rapidly toward him. The future was no longer a distant challenge. It was arriving in real time. Those closest to William reportedly noticed a subtle but significant shift in his priorities. Above everything else, his focus remained fixed on Catherine and their children. At a moment when speculation was spreading in every direction and headlines threatened to overwhelm private realities, his attention was centered on protecting his family from the growing storm. The concerns involving Charlotte were said to weigh heavily on both parents, creating an emotional burden that few outside their circle could fully understand. Yet even as those personal worries intensified, William could not escape the broader responsibilities attached to his position. That conflict between private duty and public obligation was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Reports suggested that frustration was quietly building behind the scenes, not necessarily because of one single incident, but because of the accumulation of pressures arriving all at once. Family tensions were growing. Public scrutiny was intensifying. Internal disagreements appeared harder to contain. Every new development seemed to create another challenge, requiring careful navigation. For a man long praised for patience and discipline, the situation was testing both qualities in ways few had anticipated. Senior advisors reportedly understood the risks. Many urged caution. They recognized that every decision William made carried consequences far beyond the immediate crisis. The future king occupied a unique position within the monarchy. His words mattered. His actions mattered. Even his silence carried meaning. As speculation surrounding Catherine, Camilla, and Charles continued to spread, advisors allegedly encouraged him to avoid steps that could deepen divisions or create the appearance of choosing sides in a conflict that remained dangerously unresolved. Yet remaining on the sidelines was becoming increasingly difficult. Public attention toward William was growing with every passing day. Royal observers began examining his movements more closely. Commentators analyzed his appearances, his statements, and even his absence from certain discussions. Questions emerged about what role he was playing behind closed doors. Was he acting as a mediator? Was he supporting efforts to calm tensions? Or was he quietly preparing for a more decisive role in shaping the monarchy's future? The lack of clear answers only fueled further curiosity. What made the situation especially significant was that many observers believed they were witnessing early signs of William's future leadership style. Under pressure, people often reveal who they truly are. According to some palace insiders, William appeared increasingly focused on stability, discipline, and protecting the long-term interests of the institution. Those priorities resonated strongly with some members of the royal household. Others, however, reportedly viewed events through a different lens. As uncertainty continued spreading, informal factions began forming around competing perspectives, loyalties, and expectations. Suddenly, the crisis was no longer limited to individual relationships. It was becoming a debate about influence, direction, and the future identity of the monarchy itself. Different voices were competing for attention. Different visions were emerging. And while William's influence appeared to be growing stronger, so too did the speculation surrounding every aspect of the unfolding drama. The deeper the palace tried to contain the story, the more interest it seemed to generate beyond its walls. Yet even William's growing influence could not stop the wave of speculation that was now spreading far beyond palace gates. What started as private whispers soon became a full-scale crisis management operation unlike anything seen in recent years. The deeper the uncertainty spread inside palace walls, the harder it became to contain beyond them. What had begun as scattered conversations among insiders was now evolving into something much larger. Rumors surrounding Charlotte's situation, reports of the alleged confrontation between Catherine and Camilla, growing questions about King Charles's position, and increasing attention on William's emerging role were no longer confined to private discussions. The story had escaped into the public sphere, and once it did, events seemed to accelerate with startling speed. Media attention intensified almost overnight. Every development, no matter how small, became the subject of intense scrutiny. Journalists searched for answers. Commentators examined every available detail. Observers who had once dismissed the whispers as routine royal speculations suddenly found themselves confronting a much more complicated picture. The challenge facing the palace was no longer simply managing internal tensions. It was managing a public narrative that appeared to be expanding faster than anyone could control. According to reports, palace communications teams found themselves under enormous pressure. The problem was not merely the existence of rumors. It was the sheer number of conflicting stories circulating simultaneously. Some reports focused heavily on concerns involving Charlotte. Others centered on Catherine and Camilla. Still others examined the growing strain surrounding Charles and the future direction of the monarchy. Every attempt to calm speculation seemed to create new questions. Every effort to restore clarity appeared to uncover additional uncertainty. That uncertainty became the fuel driving public curiosity. In the absence of definitive answers, countless theories emerged. Royal watchers debated possible explanations. Social discussions became increasingly intense. Commentators who normally disagreed on almost everything found themselves united in one belief. Something significant was happening behind the scenes. The lack of official information only strengthened that perception. People began asking why so much secrecy existed if the situation was truly under control. And with every unanswered question, public fascination grew stronger. Royal commentators soon entered the conversation in greater numbers, offering their own interpretations of events. Some suggested the monarchy was experiencing one of its most delicate internal periods in years. Others argued that the pressures facing the family were simply becoming impossible to hide. While opinions differed, a common theme emerged across nearly every discussion. The concerns were no longer limited to individual personalities. They were beginning to touch the broader stability of the institution itself. Public concern also deepened on a personal level. Sympathy for Catherine grew as reports continued highlighting the emotional strain she appeared to be facing. Questions surrounding Charlotte naturally intensified those concerns. At the same time, many people worried about Charles, who was already navigating significant responsibilities, while confronting mounting pressure from multiple directions. What made the situation particularly unsettling was that no single issue appeared isolated anymore. Everything seemed connected. Every development influenced another. Every rumor appeared tied to a larger story still waiting to be fully revealed. As headlines multiplied, a new question began dominating discussions. Was the monarchy simply experiencing a difficult moment, or was it confronting something far more profound? The possibility that deeper divisions exist beneath the surface became increasingly difficult to ignore. The institution had weathered countless storms throughout its history, yet many observers sensed that this crisis carried a unique significance. It seemed to involve not only relationships but also influence, authority, and the future balance of power within the royal family. With each passing day, the pressure intensified. Public curiosity became relentless. Internal concerns remained unresolved. The distance between private tensions and public debate had almost disappeared entirely. And as speculation continued spreading across the country and beyond, those closest to the situation reportedly feared that the unfolding crisis might reveal something even more consequential than anyone initially imagined. As public pressure mounted, insiders feared the confrontation had exposed a much deeper struggle for the future of the crown itself. Behind the headlines was a larger conflict, one that had been developing quietly for years and was now impossible to ignore. As speculation continued to dominate public discussion, many observers began realizing that the crisis facing the royal family was about far more than a single confrontation or a series of unfortunate events. The concerns surrounding Charlotte, the reported tensions between Catherine and Camilla, the mounting pressure on King Charles, and the growing focus on William's future role all seemed connected by a deeper underlying question. What kind of monarchy would emerge from this period of uncertainty? Beneath every headline and every rumor was a struggle that had been evolving quietly for years, gradually gaining momentum until it could no longer remain hidden. At the heart of that struggle were different visions for the future. The monarchy has always depended on balancing continuity with change, tradition with adaptation. Yet periods of transition inevitably bring competing ideas about how that balance should be maintained. Some believed stability required preserving established structures and familiar relationships. Others saw the future resting in a new generation of leadership that reflected changing public expectations. While these differences rarely surfaced openly, they reportedly influenced countless discussions taking place behind palace walls. No figure represented that changing future more clearly than Catherine. Over the years, her position within the public imagination had grown steadily stronger. Through difficult periods, personal challenges, and demanding responsibilities, she had become a symbol of resilience and dedication for many supporters of the monarchy. Her popularity was not simply a matter of public affection. It carried influence, it shaped perceptions. It strengthened expectations about what the next era of royal leadership might look like. As a result, every challenge she faced attracted intense attention, and every decision she made carried increasing significance. At the same time, Camilla occupied a very different position within the institution. Her role beside Charles had been built over many years, through moments of controversy, persistence, and eventual acceptance. She remained an established figure within the monarchy, deeply connected to the king's reign and the structures that had defined it. For some observers, that made the reported tensions between her and Catherine particularly significant. They appeared to symbolize more than a personal disagreement. They reflected the meeting point between two royal eras, each carrying its own expectations, priorities, and sources of influence. The gradual transition between generations was becoming impossible to ignore. Charles remained king, yet increasing attention was already shifting toward those expected to shape the monarchy's future. William and Catherine represented continuity for many supporters, but also renewal. Their growing prominence naturally altered the dynamics within the family. As that process accelerated, senior royals reportedly found themselves reassessing relationships, responsibilities, and alliances that had remained relatively stable for years. Those reassessments created new uncertainties. Questions emerged about who held influence during moments of crisis. Which voices would guide future decisions? Which relationships would prove strongest as the monarchy entered a new chapter? According to some observers, the events unfolding behind palace walls were exposing these questions more clearly than ever before. What appeared on the surface to be a disagreement increasingly resembled a broader debate about succession-era leadership and the direction the institution would eventually take. The public sensed it as well. Every new development seemed to reinforce the idea that something larger was unfolding. The conversation was no longer focused solely on immediate tensions. It was turning toward the future, toward legacy, toward the individuals who would eventually inherit the responsibility of carrying the crown forward. And as those discussions intensified, many feared that the monarchy was approaching a defining moment that could reshape relationships for years to come. Yet even amid growing uncertainty, few could have predicted how quickly events would escalate again. Because just as observers believed they had identified the true nature of the conflict, another development began emerging behind the scenes, one capable of pushing an already fragile situation closer to its limits. But just when it seemed the situation could not become more serious, a new development pushed the family even closer to a breaking point. The atmosphere inside royal residences reportedly became so tense that even longtime staff members struggled to recognize the institution they had served for decades. By this stage, the uncertainty surrounding the royal family had evolved into something far more serious than a temporary period of tension. The questions that had once been confined to private conversations were now affecting nearly every corner of the institution. Concerns surrounding Charlotte had never fully disappeared. The reported confrontation between Catherine and Camilla continued casting a long shadow over palace affairs. King Charles remained under immense pressure. William's growing importance was becoming impossible to ignore. Together, these developments created an atmosphere that many insiders reportedly described as unlike anything they had experienced in years. According to those familiar with the situation, internal divisions were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. The challenge was not necessarily open conflict, but the growing sense that different individuals were approaching the future of the monarchy from very different perspectives. Conversations became more cautious. Relationships became more complicated. Decisions that once appeared straightforward now carried additional layers of meaning. Even routine discussions reportedly unfolded against a backdrop of uncertainty, with many aware that every development had the potential to influence events already spiraling beyond anyone's control. As tensions deepened, emergency discussions among senior advisors reportedly became more frequent. The purpose of these conversations was not merely to manage public perception. There was a growing recognition that the institution itself needed stability during a period when stability seemed increasingly fragile. Advisors understood that uncertainty could be damaging if left unresolved for too long. Every day without clarity allowed speculation to grow stronger. Every unanswered question created opportunities for new rumors. And every rumor seemed to widen the gap between what the public believed and what palace officials hoped to communicate. For King Charles, the pressure continued mounting from all directions. His position was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Efforts to remain above the conflict were growing less effective as competing expectations demanded stronger responses. Some reportedly believed decisive action was necessary to restore confidence. Others argued that caution remained essential in such a sensitive environment. The result was a situation in which every possible choice carried risks. The king faced the difficult reality that inaction could prove just as consequential as intervention. Meanwhile, Catherine's attention remained firmly focused on protecting her family. While public fascination with the unfolding drama continued expanding, her priorities reportedly remained rooted in the well-being of those closest to her. That determination only strengthened public sympathy. Many observers viewed her not simply as a senior royal navigating a difficult period, but as a mother confronting deeply personal challenges while simultaneously carrying enormous public responsibilities. The contrast was powerful. The greater the pressure became, the more attention seemed to focus on her response. At the same time, William's future role was becoming increasingly central to discussions about the monarchy's direction. What had once been viewed as preparation for a distant future was now being examined through the lens of immediate relevance. Supporters pointed to his steady approach during difficult circumstances. Critics questioned whether even he could successfully navigate the growing complexities surrounding the institution. Regardless of perspective, One reality had become undeniable. The future king was no longer standing at the edge of the conversation. He was rapidly moving toward its center. Outside palace walls, anticipation reached extraordinary levels. Public interest intensified with every passing week. Commentators debated possible outcomes. Supporters searched for reassurance. Critics looked for signs of weakness. The sense that a major decision was approaching became increasingly widespread. People sensed that the monarchy was nearing a moment that could redefine relationships, influence future leadership, and determine how the institution would move forward from one of its most turbulent periods in recent memory. The pressure was immense. The uncertainty was relentless. And for many watching events unfold, it felt as though the royal family had reached a crossroads from which there could be no easy return. Whatever happened next would likely shape the monarchy for years to come, raising expectations, fears, and questions unlike any seen since the crisis first began. And as the monarchy stood at one of its most uncertain moments, all eyes turned toward the decision that could change everything. In every royal generation, there comes a moment that reveals what truly matters. For King Charles, Catherine, William, and Camilla, that moment may have finally arrived. After months of growing uncertainty, private tensions, public scrutiny, and relentless speculation, the royal family appeared to reach a point where difficult questions could no longer be postponed. The concerns surrounding Charlotte, the reported confrontation between Catherine and Camilla, the mounting pressure on King Charles, and the increasing focus on William's future role had all combined into a single defining challenge. What began as a series of separate developments had evolved into something much larger. It had become a test of priorities, leadership, and the values that would guide the monarchy into its next chapter. For Charles, the situation carried a weight unlike any he had faced before. Throughout his life, he had waited for the responsibility of leading the institution he had been born to serve. Yet leadership often demands difficult choices, especially during periods of uncertainty. Reports suggested that the king increasingly found himself looking beyond the immediate crisis and considering the monarchy's long-term future. The questions facing him were no longer limited to resolving disagreements or calming tensions. They touched the legacy he would leave behind and the stability he hoped to preserve for future generations. Every decision now seemed connected to a larger vision of what the crown would become after his reign. At the center of much of the public conversation stood Catherine. Through challenge after challenge, she had become a symbol of resilience in the eyes of many supporters. While facing personal concerns and extraordinary public attention, she continued to represent a sense of calm determination that resonated deeply with the public. What made her position remarkable was the contrast between the pressures she endured and the composures she was perceived to maintain. In a period defined by uncertainty, many saw her as a reminder of continuity and strength. At the same time, William's role appeared stronger than ever. The future king had entered this crisis as a central figure, but he emerged from it carrying even greater expectations. Observers increasingly viewed him not simply as an heir preparing for a distant responsibility, but as an active force helping shape the monarchy's future direction. The challenges surrounding his family had tested him personally, yet they had also highlighted the leadership qualities many believe will define his eventual reign. Every step he took seemed to reinforce the idea that a generational transition was steadily approaching. For Camilla, however, the period brought renewed scrutiny. Her position remained significant, but the public attention generated by the reported tensions ensured that every aspect of her role would continue to be examined closely. The questions surrounding influence, relationships, and future priorities were unlikely to disappear quickly. Instead, they became part of a wider discussion about the evolving nature of the monarchy and the people who would help shape its future. What perhaps stood out most during this period was the growing influence of public expectations. Modern monarchies do not exist in isolation. Public trust, perception, and support matter enormously. As events unfolded, it became increasingly clear that those expectations were helping shape conversations inside the institution itself. The monarchy was being asked to adapt while preserving its traditions, to embrace change without losing its identity, and to prepare for the future while honoring its past. In the end, the story was never solely about a confrontation, a disagreement, or even a crisis. It was about something deeper. It was about duty tested by pressure, legacy challenged by uncertainty, family bonds strained by competing responsibilities. Like every royal generation before them, Charles, Catherine, William, and Camilla found themselves confronting questions that could not be avoided. Questions about sacrifice, loyalty, leadership, and the future of an institution larger than any individual. Because while the confrontation may eventually fade from the headlines, the questions it raised about loyalty, power, and the future of the monarchy are only just beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.